Elijah Stone pulled his collar higher, bracing against the Montana wind that cut through him like sharpened steel. His eyes swept over the eastern fence line, where yesterday's storm had left its mark. 3 sections of fence toppled, pine posts strewn across rocky soil like broken matchsticks. Another day of work awaited. His hands already raw from solitude and labor, he dismounted with a grunt, kneeling beside a splintered post, counting silently. 14 new posts. A full day's work if he began at dawn. The ranch was dying, slowly, stubbornly, much like the man tending it. Yet Elijah felt no anger, no despair, only the quiet knowledge that the land demanded effort. That was enough. Then came the scream, piercing, shattering the still autumn air. Elijah's head snapped toward the sound, hand instinctively reaching for the Colt at his hip. Another scream, raw and desperate, carried from the Winters homestead just beyond his property line. "None of your business," he muttered. But his feet were already moving, mounting his horse before thought could catch up. He rode toward the cries, cresting the low rise that marked the boundary between his land and theirs. What he saw froze him. In the winter yard, muddied and torn from the storm, Sarah Winters knelt, half naked and trembling, her dress shredded and strewn across the wet ground. Her arms flailed instinctively, covering herself, eyes wide with fear. Vernon Winters loomed above, horsewhip in hand, while Meredith Winters held the remnants of Sarah's clothing. Face twisted in self-righteous fury, Sheriff Hadley stood nearby, thumbs hooked in his belt, watching like a man observing a curious animal. "Teach the harlot what happens to women who kill their husbands," Vernon spat, raising the whip. "She'll leave this property marked as the she is," Meredith added, tossing Sarah's dress into the mud. Elijah's hands tightened on the reins. He crossed the boundary before conscience or caution could intervene. "That's enough," he called, voice low, carrying the authority of a man who had once commanded respect. Sheriff Hadley's hand went to his gun. "This is family business, Stone, right on." "Family business." Elijah's voice dropped, dangerous and quiet. "Looks like torture to me." "Her husband died under suspicious circumstances," Vernon sneered. "We have the right to discipline our son's widow." Elijah's gaze fell on Sarah. Despite the terror in her eyes, there was something he recognized. Dignity. Defiance wrapped in helplessness. A long-buried part of himself stirred in recognition. "The law doesn't allow this," he said, though he knew frontier justice often bent to wealth and influence. "I am the law here," Hadley replied, glancing between Elijah and Vernon. "Elijah within his rights," Vernon added smugly. In a single fluid motion, Elijah drew and fired. Vernon's hat flew from his head, spinning into the mud. "Next one goes between your eyes," he said, voice steady. Vernon froze, color draining. Elijah dismounted, coat falling from his shoulders as he approached Sarah. He draped it around her trembling frame without, looking directly at her. "You're coming with me," he said softly. "This is kidnapping," Meredith shrieked. "Try to stop me," Elijah challenged, lifting Sarah onto his horse as she clung to him, trembling. Sheriff Hadley's voice carried across the yard. "We'll get her back, Vernon, her, and that land too." Elijah guided the horse toward his cabin, the cold wind whipping past them, aware he had just made enemies of the most powerful family in the territory. By the time they reached his cabin, shadows stretched long across the floor. Sarah stirred, half-conscious from the ride, her body weak with shock and exposure. Her eyes fluttered open, wary and disoriented. Elijah sat near the door, gun across his lap, back rigid against the wall. Clean clothes were laid out on the bed, a faded blue shirt and trousers, loose but intact. A basin of water and a bar of soap waited on the nightstand. "Where?" Her voice cracked. "My ranch," he answered, calm, without meeting her gaze. 5 miles from the Winters place. You're safe." She clutched his coat, eyes darting to windows and doors, calculating escape. "I'll wait outside while you change," he said, rising stiffly. "There's food when you're ready." Alone, Sarah moved slowly, each movement protesting from bruises and shock. She washed away the mud and blood, stepping into the stranger's clothes that swamped her frame yet offered shelter. Her gaze swept the sparse cabin, bookshelves lined with worn volumes, a small table with 2 chairs, only one clearly used, a stove radiating heat from a mantel partially hidden behind a tin coffee can. A photograph caught her eye, a woman with gentle eyes holding a small boy. She turned away quickly, uneasy. When Elijah returned with firewood, his eyes carefully averted, he said, "You should eat," nodding toward the steaming bowl of stew on the table. Why help me? Sarah asked, still standing beside the bed. Elijah stacked wood with deliberate, precise movements. Some things a man can't ride past, he answered. They ate in silence, Sarah forcing the food down, noticing through the window a small wooden cross atop a rise behind the cabin, fresh wildflowers placed at its base. Fever gripped her as night fell, teeth chattering violently. Elijah hesitated, then added another blanket over her, his rough hand brushing her forehead. Need to get your temperature down, he murmured, more to himself than her. A cool cloth pressed against her skin, his touch efficient yet gentle. When delirium overtook her, she flinched and he murmured quiet, steady words until she calmed. By dawn, Sarah slept, finally at peace. Elijah stood by the window, watching smoke curl over the Winters homestead in the distance. She appeared beside him, swaying, following his gaze. Her legs buckled and he caught her, holding her awkwardly as silent tears soaked his shirt. Everything I had, she whispered. Elijah remained still, supporting her weight, offering neither false comfort nor escape from grief. A week passed. Sarah's fever broke. Strength returned gradually. Elijah kept distance, speaking sparingly, disappearing into the land for hours at a time. On the 7th morning, she approached the corral where Elijah struggled with a spirited chestnut gelding. You're fighting him wrong, she said quietly, her voice startling after days of near silence. Elijah raised an eyebrow. May I? She asked, slipping through the rails. The horse snorted, suspicious, but her soft murmurings calmed him, her hand brushing along his neck. He's afraid of the cinch, she explained. Let him see it first. Elijah watched, impressed despite himself, as Sarah saddled the horse with confident efficiency. My father raised horses, she said. It was the one thing my husband couldn't take from me. That evening she examined his bookshelf, fingers tracing leather spines. You read Whitman? She asked, surprise in her tone. Elijah nodded, uneasy at her discovery. My father was a schoolteacher, she said softly. These were my companions. Her reverence stirred something between them, invisible barriers thinning as a shared love of words bridged silence. The following morning the cabin was quiet. Only the faint hiss of the stove and the occasional creak of timber settling under, snow's weight breaking the stillness. Sarah sat by the small window, tracing her fingers along the frost patterns as she recalled the events that had driven her to Elijah's door. She hadn't spoken much, but the silence had become a language of its own, a tense truce where words were unnecessary. Elijah moved around the cabin with the practiced efficiency of a man who had long ago learned that solitude demanded self-reliance. He stacked firewood, tended the stove, and repaired the small roof leaks that winter had worsened, all the while aware of Sarah's eyes following him, measuring, learning, testing boundaries. When the sun rose high, enough to pierce the frost through the cabin's small windows, Sarah stood, cautiously stepping, toward the corral where Elijah wrestled with the stubborn chestnut gelding, the horse pawed at the ground, ears pinned, snorting steam into the frigid morning air. Elijah's knuckles were white around the reins, sweat glinting on his brow despite the chill. You're doing it wrong, she said, her voice calm but confident. Elijah paused, narrowing his eyes. That so? Yes, she replied, stepping closer, moving carefully between the rails. The horse shifted, sensing her presence, wary but curious. May I? Elijah studied her for a moment, then nodded. The horse watched her approach, muscles tensing. Sarah murmured soft, steady words, and the animal's agitation eased. Her hand brushed along the gelding's neck, showing him calm assurance instead of dominance. Elijah's jaw tightened, impressed despite himself as she adjusted the cinch, demonstrating a method that relied on patience rather than force. My father raised horses before he died, she explained, stepping back once the horse was properly saddled. It's the only thing my husband couldn't take from me. Elijah's gaze lingered on her hands, the subtle confidence in each movement, the way her eyes measured both horse and rider. He felt a long dormant respect stir, tempered by curiosity he refused to acknowledge aloud. That evening she wandered toward the cabin's small bookshelf, fingers tracing worn leather spines with delicate reverence. You read Whitman? She asked, voice soft, tinged with surprise. Elijah nodded, a small, reluctant acknowledgement, uneasy that she had discovered this private corner of his life. My father was a schoolteacher, she said, pulling a volume from the shelf. These were my companions. The air between them shifted imperceptibly. For a brief moment, they shared something beyond words, a recognition of a life, previously defined by isolation and loss, now intersecting in fragile trust, their fragile peace shattered. The next morning, when a knock echoed across the cabin door, Elijah's hand went instinctively to his revolver, muscles tensing. He opened the door to find Jasper Quinn, a traveling trader bundled in layers against the snow, supplies slung over his shoulder. His eyes darted uneasily between the two of them. "Wanted posters in town?" he said cautiously, his voice lowered to a whisper. "Vernon Winters is offering a reward, $50, for the return of his daughter-in-law, and he's got the sheriff deputizing men to find you both." Sarah's face flushed with anger at the term he used. "Defiling?" she hissed. Jasper coughed uneasy and nodded. I didn't mean offense. But you're in danger." He's serious. With that, he handed over supplies, muttered about the cold, and left as quickly as he had arrived. Once the door closed, Elijah retrieved a second revolver from the trunk. He handed it to her, standing close enough that she felt the warmth of his chest. "Ever fired one?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "Time to learn," he said simply, positioning her hands on the grip, guiding her stance. "Breathe out when you squeeze the trigger." The gun's report echoed across the valley. Sarah's arms jerked from the recoil, but her aim was true. The shot struck the tin can she had targeted. "You were a lawman," she said, voice quiet, more observation than question. That evening, as she attempted to bake biscuits, her nervousness showed in her overcooked results. Elijah's chuckle broke the tension unexpectedly, and she laughed despite herself, the sound rusty and foreign to both their ears. The firelight cast dancing shadows across the cabin walls, illuminating quiet corners of vulnerability and slowly forming trust. Sarah spoke softly, voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "My husband drank. When he drank, he used his fists." Elijah stared into the flames, seeing echoes of his own loss. "I was hunting outlaws when influenza took my wife and son," he said finally, voice low, pained. "I buried them myself the next day." No empty consolations passed between them. Some wounds, they both knew, required acknowledgement rather than comfort. The storm descended without warning, howling winds driving snow against the cabin's windows in horizontal sheets. By midday, drifts reached the sills, sealing them inside together. Elijah stoked the fire higher, aware of the forced proximity that the storm had imposed. The cabin, he realized, had never felt smaller, nor their presence together more charged. "We need to talk," Sarah said, hands wrapped around a steaming cup, eyes fixed on the swirling vapors rising above it. "About what Vernon wants." Elijah sat opposite her, leaving space that felt both necessary and arbitrary.
"My father owned the schoolhouse property and 80 acres surrounding it,"
she began, voice low. "When he died supposedly from heart failure, I had nowhere to go. Vernon arranged my marriage to his son Frank within a month. Frank was a drunk," Elijah supplied, recalling the rumors circulating in town. "And violent," Sarah added, "but useful to his father. The marriage gave Vernon control over my father's land. What he didn't know was that my father left papers proving my ownership. Outside, the wind moaned like a wounded animal." "Why is the land so valuable?" Elijah asked quietly. "Water rights," she replied. 3 creeks converge underground there, enough water to control the valley during drought years. Frank had died falling from a horse while drunk. Vernon accused her of spooking the animal deliberately. "Did you?" Elijah asked. "No," she said, meeting his eyes. "But I didn't grieve either." Elijah nodded, understanding the quiet complicity that sometimes followed survival. "Your turn," Sarah said quietly. "Why does a former lawman live alone on a failing ranch?" Elijah's jaw tightened, memories rising unbidden. He had spoken to no one of Catherine and Thomas in 3 years. Yet her direct gaze demanded honesty. "I was a territorial marshal," he admitted finally, voice faltering, "tracking the Blackwell gang. By the time I returned, they were gone." Sarah finished softly. "I buried them myself, resigned the next day." Elijah nodded, guilt twisting within him. He had carried it alone for years. "My papers are hidden beneath the schoolhouse floorboards," Sarah continued. "With them I can prove Vernon's claims false." "You want to go back?" Not a question. Only the faintest trace of hope lingered between them. "Tomorrow night," Elijah said finally. "If the storm breaks." By moonlight, snow transformed the valley into a silent, ghostly expanse. Fresh boot prints led toward the cabin as they mounted his most reliable mare. The cold air burning their lungs, Sarah pressed against him, their careful distance eliminated by necessity and the unspoken trust forged through survival. The abandoned schoolhouse emerged, its weathered boards silvered by moonlight. Elijah secured the horse in the shelter of pine trees and surveyed the area. "No tracks," he said quietly. "Stay alert." Inside, the schoolhouse stood frozen in time. Desks aligned neatly, primers stacked on the teacher's desk as if waiting for children long gone. Sarah knelt in the back corner, hands working to lift a particular floorboard. "Help me," she whispered. Together they raised it, revealing a small metal box tucked beneath the joists. Sarah withdrew the documents carefully, her father's deed, his will, and a letter chronicling Vernon's threats. Sudden wind rattled the windows, driving snow through cracks. Elijah assessed the conditions. "We can't ride in this." They huddled together under his coat and blanket, body heat their only defense against the deadly cold. "If we die here, Vernon wins," she murmured, shivering violently. "We're not dying tonight," Elijah replied, drawing her closer. Dawn finally brought clearer skies, but danger still stalked them. Their decision to move cautiously, traveling in daylight, was shattered when a rifle shot splintered a nearby tree. Elijah growled, urging the horse toward a ravine for cover. Two riders pursued, gaining ground fast. At the ravine's edge, Elijah commanded, "Take the reins." Sarah's eyes widened as he slid from the saddle. "Go, don't stop!" The first bounty hunter appeared, rifle aimed. Elijah's shot sent him tumbling. The second circled back, firing wildly. A twig snapped, too late. A hunter emerged, pistol aimed at Elijah's chest. A shot cracked. The hunter collapsed. 20 yards away, Sarah held Elijah's spare revolver steady. "I couldn't leave you," she said simply. Something inside Elijah broke open. Years of grief, isolation, and longing surged as he crossed to her, hand cradling her face, pressing a long, suppressed kiss to her lips. She responded with equal intensity before stepping back, eyes alight with confusion and desire. "We should go," she whispered. They rode on in charged silence, only to crest the final hill and see smoke curling from Elijah's barn. Vernon's men surrounded it, waiting. 7 armed men patrolled and watched, all alert to their approach. Elijah's lawman instincts calculated options. "We could ride south," he suggested. Though he already knew the fight had to end here, Sarah's jaw set in determination. "This ends here," she said. Simple words carrying weight and resolve. Partnership forged in purpose. They split up, approaching from different directions. Sarah circling behind the barn, Elijah using the creek bed for cover. The plan was dangerous but necessary. Sarah fired first, a diversionary shot that scattered Vernon's men. Elijah used the distraction to pick off a guard, then another. They converged near the smokehouse, breathing hard. "2 down," Elijah whispered. "But they've seen our strategy now." Vernon's voice carried across the yard. "We know you're there, Stone." Sarah's answer was a shot striking a lantern on the porch. Flames leapt instantly. "The barn!" shouted a man. "The horses!" Sarah gasped, already moving. Elijah grabbed her arm. "Too dangerous. We can't let them burn." Understanding passed between them. Some lines could not be crossed. They moved as one, reaching the barn, freeing the panicked horses into the paddock beyond. A support beam crashed, briefly separating them. Through the flames, Elijah saw Sarah silhouetted, soot-streaked, determined. Clarity struck him with force. "You brought me back to life," he called across the fire. Before she could answer, Sheriff Hadley and 4 deputies appeared at the barn entrance, rifles raised. "Elijah Stone, you're surrounded." One look at each other conveyed everything. Resistance had ended. Weapons dropped with dull thuds. Deputies seized them roughly. "Vernon Winter sends his regards," Sheriff Hadley sneered, striking Elijah with his pistol butt. As they were dragged toward separate horses, Sarah caught his gaze, nodding slightly, a promise that this battle was lost, but not the war. The chaos of the barn fire still hung in the cold morning air as Elijah and Sarah found themselves surrounded, weapons surrendered and fists bruised from rough handling. Deputies bound their hands, forcing them toward the waiting horses. Sarah's eyes never left Elijah's. Her nod earlier a quiet pledge that this confrontation was merely a chapter, not the end. The men pushed them forward, eyes wary, back stiff, the snow crunching beneath hooves. Vernon Winters' shadow loomed large, A figure of vindictive authority framed against the rising smoke of the barn. The territorial courthouse sat at the heart of the small town, its wooden steps worn from years of weather and foot traffic. Inside, whispers traveled in waves, curiosity and rumor mixing with the bitter chill of winter air. Sarah, still handcuffed, stood before Judge Wilson, posture straight, despite the confinement of 5 days in a cell. Townsfolk packed the benches, eager for spectacle, hungry for the fall of a woman who had dared to defy the Winters. Vernon and Meredith Winters sat confidently in the front row, their eyes glinting with entitlement and contempt. Sheriff Hadley beside them, a silent accomplice to their machinations. Mrs. Winters, Judge Wilson began, adjusting spectacles. You are charged with abandoning your home, consorting with Mr. Stone, and theft of the Winter family property. How do you plead? I contest the charges entirely. Your Honor, Sarah replied, voice steady, unwavering, carrying across the hushed courtroom. And I have evidence of crimes far worse than those concocted against me. She produced the papers salvaged from the schoolhouse, crumpled yet legible, her father's deed and will, letters documenting threats from Vernon Winters. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as the judge examined each page carefully. Vernon's face darkened, his pride and fury visible in every line. Furthermore, Sarah continued, I have witnesses to the assault perpetrated against me by Vernon and Meredith Winters, witnessed by Sheriff Hadley, who failed to intervene. Jasper Quinn, the trader who had visited the cabin, rose, his voice trembling slightly. I saw her condition afterward. Judge, no woman does that to herself. Another man, the town blacksmith, stood. Vernon's been boasting about taking her land ever since her husband died. Everyone knows it. Judge Wilson's expression hardened as he scrutinized the documents, reading each signature, each seal, weighing authenticity and legality. These appear authentic, he said slowly. Mrs. Winters, or rather Miss Miller, according to your father's will, these are serious allegations. They're lies, Vernon thundered, rising abruptly. If I may, Your Honor, Elijah interjected, voice firm despite the bruises forming across his face. As a former territorial marshal, I recognize the signature of Judge Parker on these documents. They are legitimate. Vernon's face contorted with rage. His hand moved toward a hidden derringer, his intent clear. A shot rang out across the courtroom as Elijah lunged, placing himself between Sarah and the weapon. He fell to the floor, blood spreading across his chest. Deputies rushed, subduing Vernon and securing the weapon. Sarah knelt beside Elijah, pressing her hands to his wound. Don't you dare die, she whispered fiercely. Not now when we've just begun. Judge Wilson's gavel struck repeatedly. Order. Vernon Winters, you are under arrest for attempted murder. Sheriff Hadley, surrender your badge for dereliction of duty. His eyes softened as they met, Sarah's noting the bond forged amidst turmoil. Miss Miller, your property rights are affirmed. And it seems you have found a good man there, despite our best efforts to interfere. 3 weeks later, the valley had warmed slightly, early signs of spring brushing against the snow-melted earth. Sarah and Elijah sat side by side on the porch of his cabin, the air filled with quiet, tentative life. His recovery had been slow. The bullet had narrowly missed his heart. The land office confirmed it today, Sarah said, holding up official papers. Everything's in order, recognized and recorded. My land and yours. Elijah nodded, careful movements betraying lingering discomfort. What will you do with it? That depends, Sarah replied, her hand finding his. I was thinking, a partnership. I'm not whole, Elijah admitted quietly, fear still lingering despite everything they'd survived. Neither am I, she said, smile gentle but resolute. Perhaps together we make something complete. Beyond the porch, wildflowers began to bloom over the small grave where Elijah had buried his past. The soil transformed not by erasure, but by the improbable growth of new life. Grief and pain remained, etched into memory, yet a fragile hope, born of shared struggle and trust, now flourished in its place. The valley stretched beyond them, calm, vast, and full of possibility, and for the first time in years, both Elijah and Sarah dared to believe that life might yet be theirs to claim, not through escape or survival alone, but through partnership, courage, and a love forged in fire and snow. Spring settled slowly across the valley, but peace was still fragile. The days following the courtroom victory were a cautious navigation of reality. Elijah recovering, Sarah managing her land, and both adjusting to the tentative rhythm of life together. Even with Vernon Winters in jail, The shadow of threats past lingered. Every sound carried the weight of memory. Every movement outside. The cabin brought awareness of eyes that might still seek vengeance. One morning, Sarah stood at the cabin's edge, surveying the fields that had once belonged to her father. The snow had melted, revealing fertile earth ready for planting. Elijah joined her quietly, his steps careful, his body still stiff from the bullet wound. "Looks promising," he said, nodding toward the earth. "It does," she replied, eyes soft but determined. "It's ours now, Elijah. Both of ours." He exhaled slowly, a tension he hadn't realized he carried easing. Together they walked the land, each step a reclamation, not only of territory but of autonomy and hope. The past would not be forgotten, but it no longer dictated the future. Days passed in quiet labor. The partnership extended beyond the personal. They worked the land together, tending to fences, repairing roofs, clearing debris, and nurturing the soil. Each task, mundane yet essential, became an unspoken ritual of trust and mutual respect. Their hands met in fleeting touches over repairs. Their eyes lingered where words were unnecessary, and laughter, soft, genuine, occasionally startled, returned to the cabin. One evening, the light fading across the valley, Sarah and Elijah sat by the small stove. She traced her fingers along a leather-bound book, a volume from his collection she had come to cherish. "My father would have loved this," she murmured, voice almost a whisper. "He would have," Elijah agreed quietly, eyes reflecting the flames. "You've brought life back into this place, and into me." Her smile was gentle, understanding, acknowledging both the unspoken and the profound. They had endured storms, fire, threats, and death, yet in the quiet aftermath, something fragile and real had taken root. Then one afternoon, a courier arrived from the land office, the official confirmation of the property's legal status clutched in his hands. Sarah read the document aloud, voice steady, though a glimmer of triumph softened it. "Everything is proper now," she said, handing the papers to Elijah. "Recognized, recorded. Mine, ours." Elijah took the papers, nodding with careful precision. "What will you do with it now?" She reached for his hand, entwining their fingers. "Partnership," she said simply. "A life together on land we both care for. Not perfect, but ours." "I'm not whole," he admitted, voice low. A lingering echo of old wounds. "Neither am I," she replied, eyes bright with quiet conviction. "But perhaps together, we can become something complete." They stood on the porch watching the valley beyond, where wildflowers now bloomed across the small grave that marked the remnants of Elijah's past. Life had grown anew from grief, pain transformed into possibility. The ground beneath them, once soil of sorrow, now bore the improbable promise of hope. In the distance, the mountains loomed, silent witnesses to what had passed and what was yet to come. The winds carried no threat, only the gentle whisper of change, of seasons turning, of survival transformed into living. Elijah and Sarah stayed on the porch until the sun dipped below the horizon, side by side, hands entwined, hearts cautiously yet fully alive. The partnership they had forged through fire, snow, danger, and loss had survived each trial. Now with the valley before them, the land beneath their feet, and each other beside them, the future uncertain, demanding, but theirs awaited. And in that moment the past's weight lifted, replaced by determination, resilience, and the quiet triumph of two lives stitched together by courage, trust, and shared purpose. Through courage, trust, and partnership, even the harshest storms can be overcome. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next adventure. You never know what stories lie ahead.